Hey everyone, my name is Kari Northey and I am a funeral director and embalmer in Michigan. And during this quarantine and global pandemic that we have going on, I really wanted to do some interviews and highlight the funeral directors and embalmers that are working the front line across the world right now. So in this first in the funeral director series of these videos, I'm going to be interviewing two funeral directors from the US and their experiences with working with families right now and things they have come up with to help families honor their loved ones during this time of limitations. Hey everybody, we're back with Wally Hooker down in Indiana, and we're going to chat about how Wally as a funeral director is helping families during these last 2 months or so that we've had to limit at funerals, find new ways to honor our loved ones. So what have been your encounters with families who have had a death during this time, whether it's been from COVID-19 or whether it's just been from any other cause of death during this time?
You know, the families that I've served are different than what I'm hearing from some of my colleagues. They've been understanding. They're not living under a rock. They know exactly what's going on and they know what the limitations are. So we had one where we limited the size of the visitation early on before the mandates were put in. But the family on their own decided to limit the size, have a short visitation. We had a word of prayer and some readings here at the funeral home, and then we had a graveside service. The one who was COVID-19 positive was actually my wife's cousin. He knew everyone. This would have been one of those visitations that would have been 500 to 800 people through the doors. He was involved in the 4-H program with his kids back in the day. He'd worked at a local bindery. He had a small farm, and had friends up at the coffee shop, and it would have just been a huge visitation. So as I was meeting with the family and they understood what the limitations would be on the visitation, I don't know, I just got to thinking, how difficult is that going to be for them just to walk up to that casket, spend 10 or 15 minutes, an hour, whatever it was going to be, and turn around and leave? Because if not for COVID-19, he would have been an in-ground burial in the family cemetery. She decided, because of the limitations, that we'd use the Batesville cremation rental casket, let her family view, and then cremate and have a typical visitation and memorial service later. So that goes against everything I believe in as a funeral director, because I've seen the value of visitations. I've seen the value of having the body present and the loved ones getting to say goodbye. And now I have a gentleman in my care, and it doesn't matter that it was my wife's cousin. It could have been a guy down the street that I didn't know. I have a guy in my care who laid in a hospital and died by himself, and his wife had not seen him in 3 weeks. Now, to me, she deserves something more than a few minutes visitation and a memorial service and a visitation at a later time, because we all know in funeral service, the longer you delay any kind of memorialization after death, that sting, that impact of death begins to diminish on even the family. So you don't get the same benefits of getting that community, the family, the extended friends together to support that family, because that's what we're doing. The healing begins with us as funeral service practitioners, what we do in our funeral homes. That's how the families can finally start to find their way without their loved one. So in my mind, what could I have done different to help my wife's cousin? So they left, and then my phone begins ringing. He had a lot of extended family. They were afraid to come in to the visitation. They were all under the impression that I could let 10 in, let them out, and let 10 more in. I won't do that. That's not the way it's designed. Every time you let 10 in, that's exponentially that many more numbers that you're going to affect.
Right.
So the older relatives said, we're just afraid to come. We're just afraid to come. We'll give it to this. We may pick something up. So as I got to thinking, what about if we opened our side doors, rolled the casket over to the side doors where we take it out after a service? We have a covered portico. What if we had a drive-by visitation?
Mm-hmm.
And I ran it past my wife, and she said, I think that's a great idea. Because there was a funeral home in Chicago, I believe, that was the first to have a drive-by visitation, but it was set up a little differently than what we could do here. So I called the widow and ran it past her. And she said, let me talk to my kids. And she called me back in about an hour, and she said, we would like that. Because the way I explained it to her was, we would have the casket inside the building, but right in front of the double doors. We would have the traffic come in, if you will, so that we could get enough people on the parking lot and off the road. We would have the family at the foot end of the casket, so when they came in, they could still greet everyone.
Mm-hmm.
My wife, we didn't even have staff come in. My wife and I were at the far end of the casket. She had on gloves, if you will. It was a little chilly, and she handed out memorial folders. So we have a rule at my funeral home. Somebody's always on the door to say hello and goodbye anytime someone comes and leaves, and this visitation was no different. So what this widow and her family was able to get was the love and compassion of a community and family that loved them. They got to say goodbye to the family. They got to embrace the family from 10 feet away. They got to let that family know they're cared about, they're loved, and they got to say goodbye to their cousin, their buddy, their coworker, a fellow farmer. It was a no-brainer for us. And we will do
it doesn't get better than that.
Now, really, it doesn't get any better than that until the family says to you, what a brilliant idea. We'd have never considered that. It made it easier to say goodbye to Raleigh because we got to share him with our friends and other family. I don't have words. I'm not eloquent enough to tell you what we did for this family. And as I say, it's not about me. I'm nothing special. It's about what we do. I say it all the time. The healing begins with us.
Well, and we need problem solvers for families, and that's what you did. Was you were up against something, and you gave them an option. It was theirs to say yes or no to, and they went with it, and they found something they didn't know they fully needed right then, and that was that support. Just the physical presence of those people driving by meant the world, which is amazing. Well, and I think the fear has paralyzed some funeral directors right now, and they're turning away families, and they're, saying you have to do direct cremation, and they're living in the fear of that unknown. And unfortunately, some families are being penalized for that because they're being driven towards a direct cremation, like you said, towards cremation, when that's not really where you want to be, because maybe somebody doesn't want to handle the deceased, or feels that there's too much contagion, or whatever that fear is that's instilled. But it's, I think, giving some outcomes that are not as positive, sadly, to families losing people right now.
I agree. For a while I was pretty outspoken, and I was disgusted by people that would tell families no.
Yeah.
I was disappointed in funeral service practitioners that were afraid to embalm or fearful of handling a body and suggesting to others that they not do that. And I've gotten past that. I understand the fear. Mm-hmm. I understand the unknown. I truly do. Folks, if you're watching this and you think I'm a bad person because I got on you at one time, I truly apologize. But I'm still a passionate proponent of body present services, because how do you say goodbye to someone who's not there? That's truly what I believe. And when I on a couple of embalming sites with the family's permission, and I didn't show the body in the casket, I showed how we set up to do this drive-by visitation, not to boast about what we did, but to share with other professionals what we did, so maybe they could better serve someone in their community that was going through the same thing. And since I've done that, ask my wife. She'd have a better count than I have. I'm contacted from all over the country of people getting ready to do the same thing. My friend Frank Capper in Pennsylvania had one this past Saturday, and he shared photos. Jeff Eidner is going to have one in Bluffton, Indiana this week for a farmer. They're actually taking the casket out to the farm. They're going to have his tractor and planter and his farm equipment in front of his shop where the grain bins are. It's up a long lane. And they're going to have a drive-by visitation for this farmer on his farm. How appropriate. Seriously.
And that can happen anytime. That
yes.
need to happen just during a pandemic. And I think that the beauty of something good that's going to come out of this is people understanding how much we can think outside that little box that some of us have always maybe lived in as funeral directors, that why not take the farmer out to his farm for his visitation? We do weddings in barns now. Why are we not, going back to some barns to do a funeral out there and do a visitation and let them be in their territory for a gathering? I think it's awesome what might come in the future for some unimagined events that can now be imagined.
Kari, I have a good friend. His name's Tom Sproles. He's chairman of our State Board of Funeral and Cemetery Service. Great colleague, a great friend. He's a forward thinker. And a post that he made was, what positive thing have you picked up from the COVID-19 virus? That's what I picked up. We're no longer in the same playing field that we were. We can think outside of the box now, and it's okay. I had somebody attack me saying what I did and having a body outside the funeral home for a visitation and drive by was a spectacle and not dignified. And you know what I said to that person? I don't care what you say. It's not about you and your dinosauric opinion. I don't care. My family that I served cared. That's all that matters to me.
Wally, thank you so much for sharing. I think it's really wonderful what you're doing for families where you're at. And hopefully, like you said, it's happening across the country. And so some families are really getting wonderful service out of what they could be doing right now. Well, thank you, Wally. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks.
Stay safe, everyone. Bye.
Hey, we are back with Christy Keene down in Tennessee, who is a licensed funeral director and embalmer. We're going to chat with her about her interactions during this time of restriction with families and doing funerals. So what have been your encounters with not just COVID-19 and, deceased, the families of those individuals, but just kind of with families in general right now? Are you getting resistance when you're kind of the one that's having to control and limit what they're able to do?
Actually, I have not. It's been surprising. I didn't know how it would turn out because I'm not geared, and I think as a profession, we're not geared to say no, or, it's always a way to make things work, and the families that I've dealt with through all of this have been very receptive and knowledgeable. It's like they come in and know what their restrictions are. So it helps to work through it and to build in a direction that they're still going to get things that they need. We have a designated area in the funeral home for arrangements. We've limited that number to 2 people in the family. And it's an area that is large enough for social distancing with me and those 2 people, and it can be completely disinfected. So and it's not used very often, especially now. We've got it closed off. And then it's just been an experience.
Have you done arrangements on the phone or altered a little more, doing just the arrangement portion virtually if needed, or asking more specific questions before meeting with a family? Maybe, is anybody sick? Is anybody, you have to get a little more invasive with your personal questions maybe?
Yes, I've definitely done that. Not as far as interviews over the phone have just been more in depth, but then face to face as well, and in home removals, and over the phone you ask as much as you can. But I'm finding in my area, there's not a lot of people with the capacity to, to do what you and I are doing now. They just, even if they have their phones, they don't know. I can't make them understand what we're going to do. So we're just going to talk about it, So I do good to get a phone conversation.
So being from down south, it's a little more warm and fuzzy, I think, kind of mid-America here, not dissing our coastal friends, but how hard just personally has it been to keep that distance with families you're working with? I know that I am a hugger. I want to touch arms, hands, stand along with families. How hard has it been for you just personally having to create that distance and not being able to maybe serve families in the way that we're used to doing that?
It has been more difficult than wrapping my head around and making preparations for COVID. Just to sit across from someone and to know what their needs are. And then you've got to modify that, and you can't pat them on the back. You can't give them a hug. You can't, there's so many can'ts, even in the sure we cans, it's just, and I'm a hugger too. So it's difficult. It's very difficult.
I think the space, along with having to say that no word, even though we try and reformulate it to a different phrase, we have had to have this coldness within our business that's kind of settled in where we try and create such a warm environment. So I think that has probably been hard for a lot of our colleagues, that we have to cold down, if that's even a term, what we are so used to doing and providing as a funeral home and as a business. And it makes me sad because that's how a lot of people perceive us. And I hate that we have to come off almost the way that socially is perceived that we are, if that makes sense.
Right. And I think that can be the case in most areas. And I've witnessed, some who have not necessarily taken the steps or not wanted to, get outside the box and are happy or not really happy, but satisfied with making the, this, putting us in a box. So, we've done different things to make that not happen. And a drive-through viewing, we've had 3, and those have been outstanding. The first one, we were all nervous. We didn't know, the family and myself. And then it's just me and a part-time person who is also named Christy. So she and I are tag teaming it. She's fantastic. I couldn't do it without her. But we didn't know what to expect. But it was with a family who was deep rooted in the community. And, we depend on, when a family comes to us, we do everything that we can, but they're waiting for the support from their family and friends to come in ways of words and touches and hugs. And, and that's where the biggest challenge is, because that's a part of our work that we don't even put effort into. We just make the space available. And with the first viewing, when the widow, when a car drove through and stopped, rolled down the window and spoke to her, and she clasped her hands, and I knew that we were doing the right thing, making all.
So are you though stepping in and saying, sorry, you need to keep your windows up, or no touching? Are you trying to enforce that barrier? Are you letting them choose whether they remain social distanced or not, or how are you doing that part of it?
We encourage social distancing at every opportunity, but folks have just been really receptive. They know, that they know what they're supposed to be doing, and they really have. And in our breezeway, we're very fortunate to have. It provides privacy on one side, and then they're able to speak to the people that come through and still stay at that 6 feet, range.
Nice.
Considered safe. So, we've got some advantages there, and it's really worked out.
Are you noticing, do people put little signs in their windows? As cars are coming through, do they just drive through and say nice things out the window? Or
They do. They do. The breezeway, where we've actually got the body laid out, and then right beyond the body is the family, and the cars come from the back of the building through the breezeway. So
Okay.
before they enter the breezeway, the other Christie is there to write their name in a register book and give them service folder. You
Oh,
know,
nice.
that contains that information. So, it's worked out, and then of course they slow down by the body, and I've seen people who have been kind of reserved about that because it's like they're almost afraid to look now. It's like
Yeah.
otherwise they're not afraid to approach, but in this instance they're kind of glancing over their left shoulder. It's like, am I supposed to look now? Am I supposed to slow down? It's like they don't really know what to do. So we're trying to groom them to know what to do.
Well, it's interesting because when you go in a visitation room, you may not even know the deceased. So there's people who just go visit who they know, and they
Yes.
may even pass by the casket. But in that situation, you have to go by the casket. So
Yeah.
I can see where that would be an awkward, okay, how long do I need to pause? What's appropriate? I didn't really need to come see them. I just wanted to say hi to maybe a son or something.
Right.
I sit here, do I not? So I can see it's a new social awkwardness that maybe people have never encountered, obviously. And so trying to figure out what the norm is going to be a challenge. But I think that's interesting that you kind of brought that up. I think that's really cool. I love the psychology behind everything. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and I hired a photographer to come in with the family's permission, of course, and she documented. She's documenting along the way, and some of the shots. I just couldn't wait to see what she saw. Because
Nice.
she's not a funeral person, and she did. And some of the shots that she got they're just phenomenal. And I'm like you, the psychology side of it, just what effect is this having on people? And the first service that we had, they actually did a Zoom with their family that couldn't be there, and just to have that in pictures. And I'm going to, try to find a way to collectively put that together for the family,
Nice.
because the register book offers up the same that it always has, but this is different. This is just different.
So are you doing like the funeral side of it? Are you doing more of the Zoom, and are you Facebook live streaming, or how are you doing that component?
We really haven't had a traditional funeral request. With the family, there's 2 of us, so we allow 8 family members of whomever they choose, and that keeps us in our safe number. And they have an hour of private viewing, just them. And then at that hour is when they're escorted out, and then we set up for the drive-by. We do that for an hour, and then we go in procession. And then the pallbearer thing was a bit of a challenge at first, because not everyone in that 8 was either a pallbearer capable, either mentally or physically. So the families have to go to the car, and then I have pallbearers who meet me outside the door. It's just a logistic thing. It's just putting some thought into it to make it work. It's not saying no. It's saying different.
Right.
We're going to do it differently. We're not going to not do it. We're just going to do it differently.
Mm-hmm. Well, and being the problem solver, because I would imagine right now when somebody loses someone, all they see is this big wall in front of them of what they can't have, and helping them to understand we just need to go to a different place down the fence line to where we can make this work. Like you said, it just is going to look different than it ever has to you.
Yes.
But we can still meet your needs and walk alongside you and get you to the end where you feel supported, your loved one is cared for, and it'll be okay. So I love that. Awesome.
I know with our first family that we served with restrictions, it was an uncomfortable situation, and even when I reached out to the daughter afterwards, because I do that within a few days for sure, just to see how they're doing, if they need anything, to give any follow-ups or statuses of insurance, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And and I said, would you mind sharing your experience, in writing for me, so it may help another family who comes in. That's before I came up with the photographer idea. And she's like, Christy, I really don't know what to say. It was one of the worst experiences of my life. Not what you did, but when they told me how sick Mama was, and I knew we were facing burying her with all these restrictions and conditions and things with COVID, she said, I just didn't even want to go to the hospital. And I certainly didn't want to come and make decisions with you. So, and that got my wheels spinning. Christy, you've got to do something different. You've got to find a way to make this work, because that did not work. They walked away feeling as empty as they did when they came. And that's not my goal. My goal is that they have some fulfillment out of it, even though it's a terrible situation.
Wow. That's powerful. I mean, those moments are going to happen. That we are dealing with families now that have walked away from not being able to hold their loved one's hand and had to go through these horrible experiences of the death on top of kind of maybe what it would have been alternatively. And then we have to try and give some level up moment, not so much a positive or, make them happy or anything, but we have to create a better moment for them than what they had just experienced. Well, thank you, Christy. I appreciate it. Again, a huge thank you to the funeral directors for being interviewed for this video about being on the front line and the work that they're doing right now. Thanks so much, everyone. I want to close out the video with sharing faces of the frontline workers who are caring for all those who are dying during this time. Thank you all.